Hi, everyone. Janet Robinson here. Welcome back to the Deep Dive, the only place where my favorite normies, Tommy Bennett and Lilly Jones, unpack the mysteries from uncomfortable theories. So sink into your beanbag chair, grab a warm cup of tea, or just keep your eyes on the road. And let's get into it. Tommy, Lilly, take it away.
I want to start today by asking you to do something a little bit unusual. Unless you're driving, of course, or operating heavy machinery. I want you to just close your eyes for a moment.
Okay, doing it. Eyes are closed.
Now, I want you to go back, way back. Try to conjure up your earliest, most vivid childhood memory. Not one from a photo album, but a real moment. Maybe you're, 3 or 4 years old.
Got one. Yeah.
Okay, really try to lean into it. What are the details? Can you smell anything, like grass or maybe your mom's perfume? Can you hear a specific sound, like a TV in the background? Feel the emotion of that moment.
It's surprisingly clear. I'm seeing a red tricycle.
Okay, good. Block that image in your mind. Hold on to it. Because I have some pretty bad news.
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
That memory, the one that feels like a core piece of who you are, it is almost certainly a lie. And I don't just mean you're remembering it a little bit wrong. I mean your brain has likely constructed a complete fabrication, planted it in your past, and tricked you into believing it's a documentary.
That is a harsh way to start, but you are absolutely right. Today we are diving into a transcript from a series called Uncomfortable Theories. And honestly, uncomfortable is like a massive understatement.
It really is. The whole mission of this deep dive is to look at the neuroscience of memory and just dismantle everything we think we know about our own past. We're going to talk about why the brain is not a hard drive.
Not even close.
And how scientists have actually implanted false memories, and then the really heavy stuff, like how this biological glitch can destroy lives in the criminal justice system.
And, the existential crisis that comes with it. Because if your memories are just historical fiction, that brings up a really big question. Who are you, really?
Exactly. It's the ship of Theseus for the soul. But okay, before we get to philosophy, we have to deal with mechanics. Because I think most of us, deep down, we still operate on this assumption that our brain is a recording device.
The video camera metaphor.
Yeah. I experience something, my brain hits record, it saves the file, and then years later I can just hit play. The footage might be a little faded, sure, but it's the original.
That's the intuition. It
Yeah.
absolutely feels that way. But the source material makes it so clear. That is not how our biology works.
So, all right, disabuse me of this notion. If it's not a file cabinet, what is it?
It's a process called reconstruction. And to get it, you have to understand how memory is stored. When you experience that tricycle memory, your brain didn't save a single neat file. It basically shredded the experience.
Shredded it.
Into tiny fragments. It saved the visual of the red tricycle in your visual cortex. It saved the feeling of the handlebars in another part. The joy you felt, that went to the amygdala. The sound of the wheels, that's in the auditory cortex. These pieces are stored in completely different zip codes in your brain.
So my memory isn't a picture, it's more like a pile of debris scattered all over the floor.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Remembering isn't playing back a file. It's an active, almost desperate act of construction. Your brain has to frantically run around, scoop up all those scattered pieces, and glue them back together on the fly to show you a memory.
So every time I remember that moment, I'm not watching a rerun, I'm rebuilding the set from scratch.
You're rebuilding the set using the materials you have available right now. And this is where the science gets, well, honestly, a little scary. The source highlights the work of a neuroscientist, Karim Nader. He identified something called a labile state.
Labile, that means, what, unstable, changeable.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The research shows that when you recall a memory, you pull those fragments together, the memory becomes chemically unstable. It becomes malleable. Think of it like a block of wax. To look at the wax, you first have to melt it down into a liquid.
Okay, so I melt the memory down to view it.
But while it's liquid, you can add stuff to it. If someone asks you a leading question, or you're in a bad mood, or you just read a news story, that new information gets stirred into the liquid wax.
And then what?
And then, when you stop thinking about it, the brain cools the wax back down. This is called reconsolidation. It hardens again. But it doesn't harden into the original shape. It hardens into the new shape with all that new junk stuck inside it.
Wait, hold on. So this is like a save as glitch. It's like I open a Word document, I change a paragraph, and I hit save. The original file is just gone.
Gone forever. You've overwritten it.
Yeah.
You aren't remembering the past. You are remembering the last time you remember the past. You're making a copy of a copy of a copy.
And we all know what happens when you photocopy a photocopy 100 times.
It just becomes noise. You're creating a new version every single time. And this explains so much, like why a husband and wife can remember the exact same argument completely differently. They've both been editing the script in their heads for years.
Okay, I can kind of wrap my head around that kind of memory drift. You know, I remember my shirt being blue when it was actually green. That feels innocent. But the source material takes a hard left turn into something way more disturbing. It's not just tweaking details. It's about inventing entire events from whole cloth.
Right. And for that, we have to talk about Elizabeth Loftus.
The legend. I feel like she comes up in every Psych 101 class, but this source really goes deep on just how devious her methods were.
She's the pioneer of this field. Back in the 90s, she basically set out to see if she could, inception people. She wanted to know if she could plan a memory so vivid that a person would swear it was real. This is the famous Lost in the Mall experiment.
I love this study. It sounds so simple, but the implications are just terrifying, so walk us through it.
So Loftus and her team recruited participants. But first they did something sneaky. They called the participants' families, parents, older siblings, and got 3 real stories from their childhood, confirmed events. But then they invented a 4th story, the lie. And they presented these 4 stories to the participants and just said, hey, we spoke to your mom, she told us about these 4 things, tell us what you remember.
And the fake story was really specific.
Very specific. The prompt was something like, remember when you were 5, you got lost in a shopping mall. You were terrified, crying, and an elderly woman found you and reunited you with your family.
And just to be clear, the family confirmed this never, ever happened.
Never happened. But here's what's so fascinating. They interviewed the participants over a few weeks. At first, most people just said, no, I don't remember that. But the researchers would gently push. They'd say, just try to visualize it. Think about it for a week.
So they're forcing them into that labile state. They're telling them to build a set for a movie that was never actually filmed.
Exactly. And after a few sessions, about a quarter of the participants, 25%, didn't just agree to the lie, they started remembering it. And not just, oh yeah, I guess so. They elaborated.
That's the part that gets me, the elaboration. The source mentions a 14-year-old boy, Chris. He didn't just repeat the story back.
No, Chris is the perfect example of how creative the brain is. He started adding his own details.
Yeah.
He remembered that the elderly person who found him was actually a man. He even changed the gender. And that the man was wearing a flannel shirt. He remembered feeling so embarrassed that he was crying. He remembered his mom scolding him. He built an entire sensory world around a complete fiction.
He had memories of the texture of a flannel shirt, a shirt that never existed.
Yes, because once the brain accepts the premise, it uses that reconstruction tool to fill in the gaps. It grabs a fragment of a flannel shirt from some other memory, a feeling of embarrassment from school, and it just weaves them into this new fake narrative.
But surely when they were told it was a lie, they felt kind of silly, right?
Yeah, that might be the most disturbing statistic from the whole study.
Good grief.
Right. At the end, the researchers said, okay, we tricked you. One of these stories is fake. Which one is it? And 5 out of the 24 participants, they picked a real memory as the fake one.
Wait, hold on. They defended the fake mall story.
They insisted the mall story was true and that some actual family event was the lie. They said things like, no, I remember the mall too clearly. I can see the flannel shirt. That one has to be real. The fake memory had become more vivid, more real to them than actual reality.
That's terrifying. It implies that vividness isn't proof of truth. I always figured if a memory is fuzzy, it might be wrong. But if it's crystal clear, it must be true.
And that is such a dangerous assumption. The source even mentions a replication study from just last year, 2023.
And did the numbers go down?
They went up. In the modern study, 35% of people developed a false memory. And researchers have since implanted memories of, like, being attacked by a vicious animal, of witnessing demonic possession.
They even implanted a memory of getting sick from a specific food.
And did that change their actual behavior? Yes. The participants who were told they got sick from egg salad actually stopped eating egg salad in the real world because they remembered it happening.
So we've got reconstruction making our real memories unstable, and we have implantation where we can invent new ones. But there's a third layer to this that the source calls the corruption cascade. And this one kind of hurts. It attacks the ego.
It does. This is the idea of self-deception. We don't even need a researcher in a lab coat to trick us. We do it to ourselves all the time to protect our self-image.
The source lists some brutal examples, like people remembering their grades in high school as being better than they actually were.
Or remembering they gave more money to charity than they did.
Oh, this one's great. Remembering they voted in an election when they actually stayed home.
It's all prestige-enhancing memory. We edit the film of our lives to make ourselves the hero. But there's a paradox here that the source brings up, and I think this is the real aha moment. We tend to think that the stories we tell the most, the ones we cherish, the ones we pull out at every dinner party, are the most solid. They feel the most real because we know them by heart.
Right, the greatest hits of my life. The story of how I met my partner, or the time I scored the winning goal.
And the deep irony is, those are likely the least accurate memories you have.
That seems so counterintuitive. If I recount it all the time, shouldn't that reinforce the data?
You're reinforcing the script, not the data.
Right.
Remember reconsolidation. If you've told a story 100 times, you've put it into that unstable labile state 100 times, you've melted the wax down 100 times.
So that story of how I met my partner,
It's been subjected to what's called narrative smoothing. Real life is jagged and confusing and kind of boring, but stories need a good punchline. They need a climax. So every time you tell it, you unconsciously trim the boring parts, you hype up the dramatic bits, and you make the dialogue just a little snappier. You aren't remembering the event, you're reciting a performance that you've polished for years.
so the memories I have that are probably the most accurate.
Are the ones you haven't thought about in 20 years. The boring, random stuff you've never accessed. Because you haven't opened the file, you haven't had the chance to corrupt it yet.
That is deeply upsetting. It basically means to cherish a memory is to destroy it.
It really does. And that leads us straight into the philosophical deep end. The source brings up the ship of Theseus.
Right, the classic thought experiment. You have a wooden ship, you replace one plank every year, and eventually every single piece of wood is new. Is it still the same ship?
And if we apply that to our sense of self,
Oh boy.
I mean, think about it. We define ourselves by our stories. I am the person who grew up in this town, who had this trauma, who had this triumph. But if we now know those origin stories are being constantly rewritten plank by plank every time we think about them,
Then who are we?
exactly. The expert of the source argues that identity is basically historical fiction. The you from your childhood is a character that you have written.
It makes you question everything. Like that traumatic event that made me who I am, if I've changed the context over 30 years of processing it, am I shaped by the actual event or by the story I've told myself about it?
That is the question. And the source suggests it's the story.
Yeah.
You are shaped by the narrative. And the trap is, you can't go back and check the original tapes.
Because there are no tapes.
There are no tapes. The very act of trying to find the truth by thinking really hard about it just triggers the editing process all over again. You can't observe the memory without changing it.
Okay, so far this has all been very philosophical, very scientific. It's interesting. But there's a part of this that just stops being a fun thought experiment. Because this isn't just about whether I really scored a goal in a soccer game. This glitch in our brains has destroyed actual lives.
Yes. We have to talk about the legal system.
Yeah.
Because for all its flaws, the legal system loves eyewitness testimony.
Juries love it. It's dramatic. It feels like the gold standard of proof.
It does. When a victim gets on the stand, points a finger, and says, "I will never forget that face," it is almost impossible for a jury to argue with that. It feels like absolute truth.
But knowing what we now know about reconstruction and implantation, that confidence means nothing.
It means less than nothing. The source cites Elizabeth Loftus again. She studied over 300 cases of wrongful convictions that were later overturned by DNA evidence.
So these are people we know for a fact were innocent.
100% innocent.
Yeah.
Proven by science. And in 75% of those cases, faulty eyewitness testimony was the primary reason they were sent to prison.
75%, that's a staggering failure rate.
It's a catastrophe. And this source zooms in on one specific case that really shows the tragedy of this. The case of Steve Titus.
Yeah, I read this part a few times. It's just heartbreaking. Tell us about him.
Steve Titus was a young guy, 31, engaged to be married, his whole life in front of him. He was driving home one night, and his car vaguely matched the description of a rapist's car. Vaguely. The police took his photo,
And the victim identified him.
eventually. And that word, eventually, is the key. When the victim first saw the lineup, she said, "He looks the closest." She wasn't sure. But then the whole process took over.
The reconstruction begins.
Right. The police might have said, "Are you sure? Take a closer look." Just by showing her his photo multiple times, her brain started to overwrite the fuzzy memory of the attacker with a clear memory of Steve Titus's photo.
It's the save as glitch. She's replacing the attacker's face with Steve's face in the memory file.
Exactly. Her memory reconsolidated. By the time the trial came around, she didn't just think it was him. She was absolutely certain. She testified, she cried, she said she would never forget his face.
And because she was so certain, he was convicted.
Convicted of rape, sent to prison, he lost his job, his fiancée left him. He lost everything. He spent every moment trying to prove his innocence.
He was innocent.
Completely. A journalist actually found the real rapist, a man who confessed. Steve, no. The damage was done. The stress of the trial, prison, losing his reputation, it was so immense that Steve Titus died of a stress-related heart attack at age 35. Just days before a civil suit he'd filed was set to begin.
That's just devastating.
And the most important thing to get here, the source really stresses this, is that the victim was not lying.
Right. That's the scariest part. She wasn't malicious. She wasn't trying to frame him.
She wasn't perjuring herself. In her brain, the memory of the attack literally had Steve Titus's face in it. Her reality had been overwritten. To her, she was telling the God's honest truth, but it was a truth built by a faulty biological process.
It makes you realize that certainty is not a measure of accuracy at all. You can be 100% certain and 100% wrong.
Absolutely. Confidence and accuracy have almost no correlation when it comes to memory. In fact, some studies suggest that the more confident you are, the more likely you are to have smoothed a narrative into a work of fiction.
So, if we pull this all together, we have no hard drive. We have these Lego sets we rebuild every time we think. We can invent monsters just because someone suggests them, and this whole broken process ruins our justice system.
That's a pretty good summary, yeah.
It feels like a pretty bleak conclusion. The source says there is no original copy. So where does that leave us? Do we just stop trusting our own minds?
Well, the expert in the source does offer a bit of a reframe at the end. A silver lining, maybe?
I think I need a silver lining right now.
The idea is this. Maybe accuracy isn't the point of memory. We're not computers. We're biological organisms just trying to navigate a complex world.
So what's the point if not accuracy?
Meaning, we remember usefully. The stories we tell ourselves about our childhoods, about our struggles, they serve a purpose for us now. They help build our identity now. They help us make sense of the world.
So even if the story of how I overcame some bully in 3rd grade is like 40% exaggerated,
it gives you confidence today. It helps you define your values. The fabrication isn't necessarily a bug. It might be a feature. It allows us to be resilient, to maintain a coherent sense of self, even if that self is technically a myth.
So we're all just walking around telling ourselves little fables to keep going.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
We prioritize meaning over truth. And honestly, maybe that's okay, as long as we recognize it, and especially as long as we recognize it in a high-stakes place like a courtroom.
Right. Keep the fables for the dinner party, but maybe don't use them to send people to prison.
Exactly. Corroboration is key.
This has been a massive reality check. I feel like I need to go call my mom and ask her what actually happened on that family trip.
Don't bother. She won't know either. She's rewritten it too.
Great. Well, that's comforting.
There is one final thought from the source material that I think is the perfect way to wrap this all up. It's sort of a meta challenge for everyone listening.
Oh, I read this part. It's haunting.
It is. The idea is that right now, as you're listening, you are forming a memory of this deep dive. You're storing fragments of what we said.
But tomorrow, when you try to tell a friend about this,
You'll start rewriting it. You'll misquote us. You'll get the stats wrong.
Yeah.
You probably remember me sounding a little smarter than I actually am, hopefully.
or me sounding funnier.
Exactly. The more you think about this deep dive, the less accurately you will remember what was actually said. You are already beginning the work of turning this conversation into your own personal fiction.
On that deeply disturbing note, thanks for listening. I'm gonna go try not to think about anything ever again.
Good luck with that.
See you next time.